When priests and deacons are in formation, they are required to take homiletics classes so that they can learn how to deliver homilies. Kind of makes sense. One guideline is, of course, to relate the homily to the scripture readings for the Mass of the day. And another is to relate the homily to the particular feast or the season being celebrated, like Lent. Or if you really want to do it upright, you should talk about the readings and the feast or the season being celebrated. I want you folks to get your money's worth today, so I'm going to do both. So listen up. In the first reading, we see Moses messing with this burning bush that appears to be fireproof. And in the gospel, we hear Jesus telling a story to his followers about this fig tree that wouldn't bear fruit and was in danger of being cut down by the gardener. So I'm wondering what Lenten resolutions Moses or the followers of Jesus might make if they time traveled to the present day in this Lenten season. I think Moses would secure a patent on fireproof bushes, develop a landscaping company, and donate the profits to farmers in drought-stricken countries. I think Jesus' followers would develop an ever-blooming fig tree that bore fruit year-round and donate the figs to food pantries. And they'd all feel real good about themselves at the end of Lent. Well, I made my first communion 70 years ago and have, for the most part, tried to do something special during Lent ever since, except for the 2 years I was in the Army and for the 2 lost COVID years. I kind of lost interest and enthusiasm, to be honest, during those times. And at this point in my life, I'm questioning things more than I ever did in my younger years. I find the whole notion of giving up something or doing something special for Lent quite interesting. And what it boils down for me is this, is whether our Lenten practices are transactional or transformative. And let me try to explain what I mean by that. A transactional experience or relationship is one in which a person gives or does something with the expectation that she or he will get something of equal or greater value in return. People who went before us bartered goods and services, and we now engage in a money economy, and we expect to get a dollar's worth of goods or services for every dollar that we spend. Nothing wrong with that, for the most part. Doing a favor for someone can be transactional. You know the expression, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Nothing wrong with that, for the most part. We all know that sometimes money or doing favors can be done by someone for nefarious purposes, like giving or soliciting bribes. But the vast majority of transactions are okay. At least they are neutral. A transformative experience or relationship is something entirely different. One engages in a transformative experience or relationship not to get something back from the other person, but to change, to transform either the other person or oneself, or sometimes both oneself and the other person. And that transformation should result in something that is good. I think we've all had in the course of our lives 1 or 2 really good teachers. Granted, they got paid for teaching, so you could call that a transactional relationship. But the really good teacher wasn't teaching just for money, and we who were their students know that to be true. They really, really wanted to teach us something that would transform our lives, make us happier people, better people, more successful perhaps. I had a math teacher at Duchesne High School across the Missouri River in St. Charles, underpaid I'm sure, teaching in a Catholic school, and he invited us and his students in our class into his home one evening a week to teach us what he couldn't accomplish in the amount of time that he had for class. I'm lousy at math, but Mr. Kramer taught me something about giving without expecting anything in return. And that has helped transform my life. Do you know what's most transformative of all? It's really a no-brainer. The greatest transformation happens when there's love. I understand that there's a bit of transformation happens when there's love. I understand there's a bit of a transaction in a loving relationship, especially when we're young. I love you, and I hope you love me in return. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's only a start. Real love transforms the person who loves and the person who is loved. We become something better, something greater than we were before. And this is so apparent when you look at the life cycle of most of us. Those of you who are younger have most likely had wonderful and deep relationships, friendships, which you cherish, and you should. Many of us go on in life and marry a young man or a young woman, and we just can't imagine loving anyone more than that. But then we have children. And together, we who are parents discover that our love for our children in some way surpasses the love that we have for each other. And the amazing thing is that our love for each other is not at all diminished because we're loving our kids. To the contrary, our love for each other is enhanced in a way that we could never have predicted. But wait, as those obnoxious commercials say, there's more. You know where I'm going with this. Our kids grow up and they get married, and then they give us grandchildren to love. And we who are blessed, lucky, whatever you want to call it, to be grandparents, discover a love that really is beyond anything that we could ever possibly imagine. And every grandparent knows that to be true, right? Say right. Right. Thank you. Okay. You know, it's true. You just love those little people so much, you think your heart's just going to bust out of your chest. And it's safe to say for many of you younger people who have doting grandparents, they're convinced that the sun rises and sets on you. And that may be the closest you'll ever get at this point in your life to unconditional love. I need to add that there are those who never marry who develop deep and abiding relationships that really can be a wonderful example to the rest of us. I've seen this in priests, religious brothers, and religious sisters whose love for young people is very, very similar to that of a parent or grandparent. There's something in all of these experiences of transformative love that they have in common, and it's this. Transformative love in all of our human experience is a faint mirror image of the love of God. It's eternal, it's limitless, it's expansive, it's always growing, and it's ever evolving. Yes, love is transformative. It changes the lover and the beloved. It can bit by bit bring about the best in the lover and the beloved. It is transformative in almost a literal way because it brings into existence a new form. And the Bible speaks of this in many places. St. Paul says in Romans chapter 13, quote, "Put on the Lord Jesus Christ." And Paul says in chapter 4 of the letter to the Ephesians, we should, quote, "Put away the old self of your former way of life and put on the new self, created in God's way of righteousness and holiness of truth." And in chapter 3 of Colossians, we're reminded that we, quote, "have taken off the old self with its practices and put on the new self, which is being renewed in the image of the Creator." And Paul explicitly speaks of transformation in his letter to the Romans, saying, quote, "Do not conform yourself to this age, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and pleasing and perfect." It's all there, folks. I'm not making this up. You have to look at it. So what exactly is the nature of this new form being transformed? It's really hard to describe. One almost has to experience it to know it. When one loves, one becomes love. It's not just something that you do, it's something that you become. And God is the origin of all that is, of all that exists, all that ever existed. God makes something seemingly out of nothing. God transforms God's self, including us humans, who are made, quote, in the image and likeness of God, as it says in the very first chapter of the very first book of the Bible. And what if one asks, what is God like? We don't need only to look at chapter 4 of the first letter of John. Quote, God is love. And whoever remains in love remains in God, and God in him or her. So we're never more like God than when we love, especially when we love in the same way that Jesus did. And Jesus himself had this to say about love, as is written in John's Gospel. Quote, this is my commandment. Love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. And we know from history that the love Jesus had for his friends changed them and changed the course of history. And granted, Christianity took many a wrong turn throughout history. But you know, if the teachings of Jesus were lived instead of just preached, we'd have a different world. The world and its people would be just instead of unjust, inclusive instead of exclusive, peaceful instead of violent, truthful instead of deceitful, selfless instead of selfish, trusting instead of suspicious, and loving instead of hateful. So circling back to Lenten practices, I'd have this to say to you and to myself certainly as well. Go ahead and engage in your Lenten practices, whatever they are, but take a moment to reflect on whether they are transactional or transformative. And if you or if I'm engaging in acts of prayer, almsgiving, sacrifice, or charity, please take a moment to honestly ask yourself if you're doing this because then God will owe you something, like graces you deposit in a spiritual bank account to be used to buy a ticket to heaven when your life is over. And if that's mostly the case, then your Lenten practices are transactional. But if you find yourself there, don't be too hard on yourself. Maybe instead reflect on how you can engage in those very same activities in a transformative way, in a way that really changes you, that makes you a more loving and giving person, in the manner of Jesus, who delighted in serving others, and in the manner of God, who delights in us, not for anything we can do for God, but simply and wonderfully just for being what we are. So perhaps we could all during this Lent make efforts to be more loving, not just in exceptional moments, but in the ordinary times of life. I find myself less certain about a lot of things as I grow older, but there are a few things I am absolutely certain of. Love is transformative. Love changes everything. Love changes everyone. Love will change me, and love will change you. Love will never, never let you be the same.